Oh my god, guys, the fact that I had to endure the Golden Age arc twice now. Oh, saying that, it has to be one of, if not the best, story arc I've ever read of anything ever. I'm still quite new to manga. I haven't read a whole lot of arcs other than One Piece, for instance. But I'm just talking about in general too, like of novels and even TV shows when they get their like story arcs in. And I just feel like Golden Age. Oh my god, it's almost perfect. It's almost perfect. There are a couple of things that I really don't like, but putting that aside, I just think it's just brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Also, I've been wanting to sit down and talk about the Golden Age arc for so bloody long now, but I've kind of just been, how do I talk about it? How do I say things? So I have talked about the first half of the Golden Age arc before on my channel, chapter by chapter. Honestly, I'm kicking myself why I didn't just continue, at least to have finished out the Golden Age arc, considering I was on the precipice of like the eclipse, you know, just like why didn't I just continue on? Ugh, I'm so frustrated with myself. But I just absolutely adore how the Golden Age arc starts. So like at the end of the Black Swordsman arc, we have Guts. I mean, I can't really tell too much if he's actually crying, but he is upset and he looks sad. And then we go into the Golden Age arc, and the first time we meet him as a baby is him on the ground crying. Well, I mean, it seems like he's dead at first, but then he wakes up crying. Like, the first thing that Guts does as a character in the Golden Age arc is wake up crying. So I just love how we transitioned into it. I love the fact that, yeah, the Golden Age arc is this massive sort of flashback, because we started off with the Black Swordsman arc, and now we're going back in the past to see how Guts got the brand, how Guts lost an arm, how Guts lost an eye, and just all of the things that really add so much to his character. And I'm so glad it came after the Black Swordsman arc. I feel like if we just got thrust into the Golden Age arc, I wouldn't really connect with Guts on an emotional level like I do now. And it's just meant that the intrigue has been kept throughout the Golden Age. And also to go from Guts being so super strong in the Black Swordsman arc to being very weak at the start of the Golden Age arc is, again, like such a jarring juxtaposition that it makes the build-up of Guts' character throughout the Golden Age arc that much more brilliant to me. It adds a lot more weight to his drive and his ambition, and I feel like the whole arc itself is sort of lending into the theme of dreams and ambitions and where Guts places in the world. There are a couple of moments in the Golden Age arc where Guts is kind of questioning the entire world and sort of like his place within it. So one of the early examples of that is when Guts is running away from his like childhood home essentially with Gambino after, you know, accidentally killing Gambino, and finding himself alone under the stars and just saying how vast the universe is, and like the whole cosmos thing is just, again, like such a brilliant way of picturing Guts within this world. Is there a little child shouting outside right now? Can you hear that? Where's a Crimson Behealer when you need it? I'm kidding. Oh my god. So I feel like Guts as a character is someone who we see in the first arc, as someone we just like don't really... Like, I always felt some kind of attachment to him because I felt like he had a lot of trauma within him and he was acting out in certain ways. So, like, I do feel connected, but to have him be at such a low point at the very start of Golden Age, it's like we go to the lowest of the low with what Donovan does to Guts as a child, in like the way that he's called like a demon child, a devil child, and that he's a bad omen, that he shouldn't be alive. And all of these things I think are just so important to his character journey. And again, like, I don't know why I'm trying to jump ahead towards the like the very end of Berserk whenever it does end, and the feelings that I think Guts might end up like dying at the end of this story, just because he's like kind of brought into the world with the death of his like birth mother and literally being like born from a corpse essentially. It's like I feel like he is going to return to that at the end of the series, and there are certain moments in the Golden Age arc as well. If I remember which moments, I will mention them during this like very random talk about it. And I do feel like it's just like all part of the causality of the series that I think Guts is somebody who is just going to be returned to death at the end of it. I have 3,000 words of notes here. Because I just freaking loved this arc so much. I think even like rereading it too, because this is my second time reading it before going into the new arcs that I've never read before, I felt a different kind of experience because I had no idea what the eclipse was, because it kept being alluded to and I had no idea what it actually meant. But upon a reread of the arc and knowing what it is, oh, that level of dread that level of dread. I felt more connected to the Band of the Hawk, for instance. I felt more connected to Casca this time round, and Pippin, and Judo, and just like the entire team even. And you know what, even to a certain extent, Griffith. Oh, it's so tragic, is the thing. Like, this is a hugely tragic series of events. I was hoping for a different outcome. I was rereading this, knowing what was going to happen, and just hoping for a totally different outcome. And upon peeling back those layers on this reread, being able to focus on different things that I kind of missed the first time around was just so eye-opening. And parts of it had me questioning my own morals and my own kind of sense of ambitions. And, you know, it's like this was a fantastic study into character, and just also how the plot is just so intricately and gorgeously woven throughout, honestly. Like, when you think of the eclipse being like the big moment of the Golden Age arc, like, you can't just have the eclipse. There are so many moments before that, leading up to the very start of the arc, that makes the entire thing so important. There are so many moments where you think, oh, so if that didn't happen, would the eclipse have happened? And I can't really pinpoint an exact moment, like, you know, this sort of like butterfly effect. I can't pinpoint an exact moment. It feels like everything that preceded the eclipse was necessary and so important to the actual event happening. Because I could say, oh, it was Griffith's ambition that made the eclipse happen, but would Griffith's ambition have been the downfall of him if it wasn't for that woman who oversaw him having sex with Charlotte? And even before that, would Griffith have even gotten that position if Guts hadn't left the Band of the Hawk? But even before that, if Griffith didn't ask Guts to assassinate you know, a couple of characters, Guts wouldn't have overheard the speech that Griffith gave Charlotte. And, like, if he didn't overhear that speech, would he have even left the Band of the Hawk? You know, there's just so many moments that just keep going, you know, through the arc, all the way from the eclipse to the start of the arc, that I just think, God, if this didn't happen, would that have happened? You know what I mean? It's just, it's genius. This is why the Golden Age arc is, like, one of my favorite stories ever. And the emotional weight and turmoil of knowing the fate of these characters. Because when we first meet the Band of the Hawk, my first read of the Golden Age arc last year, I did like the characters, but I didn't feel as connected with them. But on a second read, seeing Guts find family within the Band of the Hawk, finding solace within this sort of camaraderie, and being able to be removed from his childhood trauma because of them and because of the friendships he formed and his like relationship with Casca and Griffith, I just felt more invested this time round in the characters, and I cared so much about what would eventually happen to them. And I just can't help but now say, because as I was reading the start of this arc again, and the moment when Guts meets the Band of the Hawk, the first time we meet them properly, it's when there is this like vast field of green, of life, of laughter, of like sun, and it just felt so warm and beautiful, and like the possibilities were endless. That was the first time we met the Band of the Hawk, and it was this open, lush green field. Compared to where we end the Band of the Hawk story, in this enclosed, nightmarish hell where the eclipse is happening. The sun has been covered, there is no greenery in sight, it's replaced with red, and they're being slaughtered. And I just couldn't help but think of that as I was rereading the Golden Age, the first time we see them properly, and I'm like, I kept blinking and I kept seeing the eclipse happening within where this field was. It just taints the reading experience when you're rereading it, because you can think of, this is where they're starting, but I know where they end up. It's beautiful. It's honestly beautiful. I don't know if it was intentional or not. I feel like Muira was a genius and everything is intentional, but I couldn't stop thinking about what was coming. The eclipse kind of overshadows everything that happens, but I want to say too, like, I'll get to like the proper eclipse soon and I'll talk about it and go through it, but like even before that, there are so many story arcs that I freaking loved in this. When we meet Nosferatu's Zod, for instance, I thought that was fantastic. Even before that, when Guts kills Gambino and he's running away from the camp, and it's like, the paneling of that is absolutely gorgeous. And Guts being under the stars is like one of my favorite panels ever. And Guts versus Griffith, the first time when they engage in battle, when Griffith wins and tells Guts, "You're mine," that whole sequence was so good. When Guts bites the sword, it is so erotic. I mean, epic. That whole sequence was fantastic. Even like kind of Guts slowly starting to become part of the Band of the Hawk, in making friends with them. I think it was when Pippin carries him down the stairs towards them so that they can have some drinks together after one of their like first fights together and the victory of it. It was, oh, after what Guts has been through, I was like, yes, he has found his place. He is among friends. He is safe. Like, that was like a great feeling. I was like, can we just end the series there? Knowing what's coming, can we just end the series there and just pretend that the Band of the Hawk lived forever and they were always together and it was just a great time? But unfortunately not. I think the turning point was probably when we met Nosferatu Zod and we get the whole Behelate kind of stuff and going back to the idea that Griffith is probably a character that we should keep our eye on, because it's very easy to fall in the trap that Griffith is a good guy, and I do feel awful for him in like up until the eclipse. I felt awful the fact that he worked so hard towards his ambition. There's so much relatability there in, you know, coming from almost nothing to almost achieving your dream. Like, it was in sight and it all fell apart. He isn't a good guy whatsoever. I just kind of related to his drive, to his kind of wanting to achieve his dream for like a better life for himself. Like, you can understand a lot of the stuff that he does, and then obviously when like all of that falls apart, and I'm going to talk more about, you know, when it all falls apart later, but I think to begin with, honestly, I was just really rooting for the whole Griffith and Guts and Casca storyline, with them just, you know, enjoying their company and elevating the Band of the Hawk to where they got to before everything fell apart. And all the stuff in Nosferatu Zod and stuff was like such straight up horror. One of the reasons why I love Berserk so much is the horror elements and the disgusting imagery, the gothic imagery. The Golden Age arc did not disappoint when it came to those set pieces. Like, for instance, as well, like the mausoleum later on, that was gorgeous. Also, the kind of secret church-esque meeting with the Queen of Midland later on, that was a gorgeous set piece too. I could probably talk for hours upon hours of the atmosphere in Berserk and the gothic gorgeousness of Berserk, but I kind of want to keep this not as long as possible. But yeah, as soon as we get to like Midland and we get to all of that kind of stuff, that's when we get like such a mix of emotions, because again, I can kind of pinpoint moments that I think lead to Griffith's downfall, aka the eclipse. So for instance, like Minister Foss, he was awesome. Like, he's such a little shit stirrer. I freaking loved it though. I don't like him personally. Like, we would never be friends. Although I feel like maybe keep your friends close but your enemies closer would be pretty handy with Minister Foss. But you know what I mean? I think as a character, he was brilliantly developed, and the way that he kind of snaked his way into the ears of some of the characters was great. The way that the Queen's downfall came from Minister Foss playing both sides essentially, and Griffith being smarter than all of it. Oh, it was just absolutely beautiful to watch. I love the entire sequence with the Queen and her trying to kill Griffith, but it kind of backfiring and Griffith setting the whole thing on fire. Oh, that was just incredible too. I loved it so much. That Queen got under my skin, even though she wasn't one of those monsters. And even with the King too, there are some human characters that are a little bit scarier than the designs of the monsters, because they are so human. Like the Queen's eyes being so piercing, her anger too. It made me more scared than some of the really weird, freaky things that appeared during the eclipse and before that. Because sometimes humans scare me more than supernatural creatures. And it's the same with the King too. The King is disgusting. Like, he doesn't begin that way. He seems like a normal, fine-looking fellow. But then it gets to the moments when he tries to do some awful things to his daughter, when he starts to look terrifying. He starts to look less human. And even that time jump when Griffith is captured, he looks ugly when we come back. He looks so different. And it's kind of like his impurities have poisoned his soul to the point that he has become this disgusting creature himself. So yeah, I love the human designs of a lot of the characters. I just think Muira, he had it all. I also love the fact that the Golden Age arc kind of played me a little bit, because after the assassin storyline, which I loved as well, I honestly think this story, the Golden Age arc, just had so many great little story arcs within it. But the assassin one, when Guts accidentally kills the child, and that whole spiral that Guts goes into afterwards, and the way that he sees himself, and he remembers Gambino, and he remembers when he was a kid, and all of that. It was kind of a great setup for thinking that maybe the villains of the world would be someone like Guts or someone like Zod be the villain over Griffith, even though Griffith did orchestrate the whole thing, and Guts wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for Griffith's instruction. But like the way that Guts was framed for a lot of this story made it seem like Griffith wasn't gonna be like a villain. Obviously we know he will be because of the Black Swordsman arc, and it's kind of genius how Miura can make me doubt myself in who is the real hero here, who is the real villain. That line is so blurry, and for a lot of it, seriously, Griffith seemed to be the hero of the story. He's even referred to as the chosen one by the God Hands later on, which really does subvert your expectations when it comes to chosen ones in that trope. But even then, again, you will have touches of Griffith being villainous, and the way that he looks, like say when he sees Minister Foss and his eye, like Griffith's eye is so scary, you know. And like even I think it was Judo who mentioned sometimes he comes across like a kid, but other times he is a lot scarier than that, you know. There's this whole thing about Griffith that you just can't really predict. I do think Griffith is the most interesting character I've ever read ever, of anything. He's not my favorite character in terms of like, oh, I love his personality and I love what he does. Nothing like that. He's not my favorite in that kind of sense. But he is definitely the character I am very, very excited to see where he ends up going and to see what happens next with him, because he was an absolute standout in this arc. And Griffith's speech as well was such a turning point, and I felt added such a change to Guts as a character also, listening to him and talking about like equals and what it takes to be his equal. And yeah, it really resonated with Guts, and it resonated with me as a reader too. I also don't usually like fights, and I thought upon a reread that I wouldn't like it as much as I did the first time round, because I remember there were a lot of fights and wars and battles in the Golden Age arc, but this was kept very, very interesting. For example, when Guts kills like 100 men on his own, I was like, shit, that is epic. Like, that is so incredibly incredible. For instance, One Piece is my favorite manga ever, but the fights are some of my like least favorites. Like, not what I read One Piece for. I read One Piece for the story. But when it comes to Berserk, I feel like even the fights are just epically epic. And at times, Guts scares me when he does that, because he'll have this really angry face on him and he turns inhuman when he does that. Well, not like physically, but on the page he looks inhuman when he engages in those kinds of battles. He lets his sword just kind of rule, and just he goes wild. He just absolutely goes wild, and that is terrifying. So there are genuine moments in this arc when Guts scares me more than the monsters do. Yeah, so Tombstone of Flame, epic. That was when the Queen died. Morning of Departure, oh my gosh. Yeah, so I can kind of pinpoint this as another turning point in the arc. I feel like there were so many turning points. We were in like a 360-degree kind of experience with Golden Age. So many turning points. But Morning of Departure, oh, well, for one, I love that it was set in snow. I just felt like there's something so symbolic with the purity of the whiteness with that. And like, obviously Griffith and Guts are not pure by any means at this moment in time. But when you compare it to, again, what happens next, it's like any kind of implication of purity, that is where we leave it. That was the last time we will see any kind of pureness within Griffith, for example, because at the end of that fight, when Griffith's sword shatters, that's his dream shattering. That is the end of Griffith's purity, whatever remnants of it was left. Because I would argue he still had semblances of purity, or at least like of goodness at that point. He was still trying so hard to cling to Guts, who I would argue was his best friend, and his crew too, like the Band of the Hawk. Like, I feel like that was the last time Griffith himself felt connected to his comrades. That was the last time it was a true camaraderie, I guess, like a kind of true partnership in a way. Obviously with Griffith still standing atop, but yeah, everything shattered after that, everything crumbled after that. But I just love that whole build-up, you know, with Griffith being like, how am I going to take Guts down? He overthinks it. He is thinking so much of it because it means so much to him. In my opinion, it meant so much to him that Guts would even think of leaving. So obviously it felt like a betrayal, but then Guts just like easily overtakes him and walks away. And it's just such a juxtaposition to their first battle when Griffith won and said, Guts, your ass is mine. And that leads to Griffith having sex with Charlotte, but the entire time he's thinking of Guts. It's like he's trying so hard to cling onto Guts by doing that. And I don't fully understand the entire context. I don't fully understand the levels of what he does with Charlotte or anything like that. I just kind of associate that with Griffith trying so hard to cling to Guts. What a complex and incredible relationship there, right, between Griffith and Guts. Like, I've never read anything as complicated as that. People could do dissertations on Griffith and Guts and their relationship, and I would read every single word. So yeah, everything changes after Guts leaves and Griffith is captured. And it is still fantastic after, like, the time jump, and Guts rediscovers the Band of the Hawk and finds out what happened the last year and the complex feelings between Casca and Guts. And I haven't really mentioned Casca too much. I'm very conflicted with Casca, especially with what comes later on during the eclipse, and I feel like maybe some parts of it were a disservice to her as a character. But I like Casca myself. I really do think she is awesome. I love the fact that she was the only woman in the Band of the Hawk, and she really held her own a lot of the times. And her relationship with Guts, and like how vulnerable and honest they were with one another, with their pasts and their present, it felt beautiful. Their love story felt beautiful to me. I really do wish we got more of Casca. Not a whole lot to report about, like, the whole trying to get Griffith back. My heart dropped for Griffith when we discovered him in the cell, and like his tendons had been severed, and like, it made me feel sick. It made me feel physically sick. And that was the death of a dream. You know, like, Griffith would never be the same again. And you can't help but feel bad for him, considering everything that the arc has built up to that point. We feel like, oh, was everything a waste then? Were all those years just a waste? And that is something that I feel like is hard to wrap your head around when it's your dream that has shattered and there is no possible way for you to regain it. So that is why I said, like, oh, I kind of sympathize with Griffith earlier on. That's the only reason why, because from that point on, from the moment he was captured, yeah, he was different. He wasn't the same, and he will never be the same. Is it Wild? Is that how you pronounce it? Like, the monster that ends up chasing the Band of the Hawk after they've saved Griffith? Is it Wild? Wild. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of the names yet, but that whole scene was great, and I love the fact that the fights are never that easy in Berserk. They can sometimes take chapters upon chapters for them to be taken down, and that whole fight between like Guts and Wild was incredibly intense. And again, there were so many seeds planted in Griffith's brain about using the Behelit and summoning the great ones, or like the guardian angels, or whatever he called them. So again, like, that's another thing where, if you know, Wild didn't say any of that, would the eclipse have happened? If the king didn't send him after Griffith in the first place, would the eclipse happen? You know what I mean? So yeah, I enjoyed all of that. Like, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed all of that. But like, literally, because we are just on the precipice of the eclipse now, just like, let's just talk about the eclipse. That whole sequence of Griffith in the water, and he's thinking back, or at least like he's having some kind of like dream sequence where it is a younger him, and there is like this old woman giving him some like home truths about where he is in life and how he got there, and all the corpses that he's walking over, and that the castle is just in sight but he just can't quite reach it. That was beautiful imagery that, again, I think informs Griffith's decision of what he ends up doing to his friends. Like, he's already walked over so many bodies up to this point. What's a few more to him? And I just think back to the departure, the moment of departure. I think that was just the moment when everything was severed for him. Even his affinity to his own friends, like the Band of the Hawk, I feel like from that moment on it was just severed. Like, they really didn't mean that much to him by then. Again, you could argue otherwise, but I just think that is maybe the point of no return, especially since Griffith is so hyperfixated on Guts and Guts alone, essentially. When Griffith seemed like he was going to kill himself when he, you know, in the water, but then he sees the Behelit, and it was all causality because it was going to come back to him. Again, like, the whole sequence was just so incredible. Like, Guts and the Band of the Hawk running towards him, trying to save him because they think that he's in danger. They're getting closer and closer. Guts is coming closer and closer. And Griffith is actually shouting out, "Don't come closer, don't get near me." Like, I can't help but think, Was Griffith trying to save Guts there? Was he honestly trying to save him? Or did he just not want Guts to stop him doing from what he was going to do? I feel like I'd have an argument for both. I'm leaning more towards he wanted to save Guts. But then again, would he have really known the sacrifice and like what he would have to do when he brought the Guardians and brought about the eclipse? Did he know that beforehand? I don't know, but I do still think that he wanted to save Guts and remove him from any kind of dangerous situation. It's really just like the rest of the Band of the Hawk that I just don't think he really cared about anymore. Oh, but then you see the weird shapes coming out of the water and walking towards them, and then it all turns like red and the eclipse is happening, and like there's these huge faces on the ground, and there's like this huge ass woman coming up. It's just like, oh my god, the eclipse was fucking insane. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was awful. And just like it was suspenseful. Like there was a level of suspense and tension just like as this undercurrent leading up to the slaughter. It just every word uttered by the four god hands, oh my gosh, like it was just poetry, but dark poetry, talking about ideas and concepts bigger than my human brain can comprehend, in what Griffith needs to do in order to become the fifth god hand, because he is a chosen one. And I'm just like, a chosen one? Because of that ugly looking Behelit thing? Like, oh my god, and it's ugly. I'm not judgmental, but that Behelit is one ugly looking thing. And the fact that all of the Band of the Hawk are going to be sacrifices, all of them. Like, that's how Guts gets his brand. That's how Guts loses his arm and his eye. Just like everything so pivotal happens in these few chapters. Like, I think it's less than 10 chapters this entire thing happens. It leaves you speechless. This is why it was so hard to even start filming this review of the Golden Age arc, because like there are no words for the scope of it, the despair, the gorgeous artwork that Muira has illustrated. I feel like this review itself is a disservice to the Golden Age, because there is just nothing I could possibly say about all of these moments to fully encapture the genuine feelings you get while reading the arc, which I think is such a testament to how brilliant it is. There are just so many symbolic moments that happen, you know, like when Griffith drops Guts. Like at first he kind of saves Guts from falling, but then he kind of lets go, or Guts was a little bit too heavy, so Guts falls and he falls away from Griffith. Like he is no longer attainable anymore. Griffith is up, being transformed into Femto, and now it's just over. It is just over. Any kind of connection between them, any kind of possible way of saving Griffith is gone with just dropping Guts at that moment. Seeing all the Band of the Hawks scatter and try to fight for their lives, it's just so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. Pippin, Judo, it just... Okay, so Casca. I hate what happens to Casca, to the point where I think it is unnecessary that we had a whole chapter dedicated to what Femto ends up doing to Casca. We didn't need that. I genuinely don't think we needed that. We could have had just maybe a page or two of what happens, but we had an entire chapter. To me, it felt unnecessary, considering this was the 4th or 5th time in this arc alone that Casca had been assaulted. Like, it isn't the first time. In fact, it isn't even the first time during this eclipse that it kind of happens to her. It happened with Wild, it almost happened with Wild, like again, like she was exposed during that. It happened during Guts killing all those 100 men and she was trying to run away. Happened then. You know, like there were so many moments, which again is like totally realistic in a fantasy setting, a medieval fantasy setting, when Casca is the only woman on the battlefield, the only woman presence there, and you have these really seedy, ugly, disgusting men who are around trying to claim her and claim her body. Okay, my camera died during that little rant there, but like what I'm trying to say is it just happened one too many times for Casca that by the time we got Femto doing what he does to her, I felt unnecessary at that point. I mean, I don't think the action itself was unnecessary, because I think there was this parallel between when Griffith first saved Casca when they first met. He saved her from being sexually assaulted, and here we kind of have a full circle moment where he is doing the sexual assault, and in front of Guts too. I don't think it was a personal thing that he wanted to do to Casca. He wanted to hurt Guts for some reason. He either wanted to really hurt Guts, or he wanted to say, don't come and save me anymore, this is over. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like severing ties with Guts and Casca. So I'm not like saying what actually happened itself was unnecessary. I just didn't think we needed a full chapter of it happening. It was very uncomfortable, which I know is the point, and it made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel sick. And again, I think that was the point. But, you know, it had been like the fourth or fifth time it's kind of happened to Casca, and I was just kind of like a little bit fed up with that. But it does solidify the fact that Griffith can never be redeemed now. He can't be saved now. That's it. That is it. You know, if there was any kind of possible chance of a redemption, he ruined it by doing what he did to Casca right in front of Guts. I mean, obviously he ruined it when he killed all of his friends with the Eclipse as sacrifices, but like the violation of Casca, the hatred and the anger and the depravity of him during that moment, that is what really solidified the no redemption for me. He is a lost cause. I mourn for the Griffith beforehand who had a dream, who had ambitions, who had friends, and all of that. I mourn for him, but he is no longer alive to me. As soon as he said sacrifice, that was when all bets were off. But I feel like Miura kind of needed to solidify that with the whole interaction with Casca. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not like that well versed. I would need to talk more about it with a lot of people. Please do let me know your thoughts on it below too. Like, again, I'm not saying Miura was bad for doing it. I just felt like a whole chapter was unnecessary. And that is like the low point for me for the Golden Age arc, which I'm going to give it like a 10 out of 10. Like, I thought it's like brilliant. It is like the one dark spot for the arc for me. But I am torn because I know it's the point. I know it's happening during the eclipse. The eclipse is evil. It's like the worst of mankind, of humankind, of monster kind, of any kind. It's the worst of the worst. It's just plain evil. I get it. I understand it. Also, the Femto face reveal was giving Dream face reveal. It's just the way like it kind of angles his face, and it's the first time we see Femto. I was like, hi, I'm Dream. That's kind of like what I got a mental image of. I was really scared for Rickert as well. I couldn't remember what happened to him when I was rereading it. And then that scene happened where Rickert is by himself. Well, not exactly by himself. He's with some members of the Band of the Hawk. But then they get slaughtered one night. That whole scene too was incredibly tense and awful. But I'm glad that Rickert ended up the way he did, because he does end up coming back into the main story. And he comes across Guts and Casca when they escape the eclipse. I'm so glad they escaped. And the Skull Knight. Oh my god, the Skull Knight. He is so interesting. He's not really a villain, right? He's it's very like Shades of Grey. Like, he saves them from it, but like I can't get a read on this Skull Knight. He's just so interesting too. The fight with Zod, incredible. The way that he gets Rickert and Guts and Casca to safety, fantastic. I do love the end of this arc. It felt a lot more calmer than what came before, while also giving us a taste of what's to come, especially with the brand now too. And I didn't know that Casca would get branded. I thought she was going to die because she wasn't around in the Black Swordsman arc, and I was like, okay, it's the eclipse, she's been branded, she's going to die. But apparently like she is still alive at the end of the Golden Age arc, but she does have a brand. And also she's gone through so much trauma that she's kind of reverted, like her mind has kind of reverted to a childlike state. She doesn't really remember Guts. She doesn't really remember what she's gone through. And she isn't the same. And I feel awful about that. After everything she's been through and the strength of her character, and she ends up the way she does, she gives birth to this like little demonic embryo thing. Damn, like that's just rough. That's awful. So I hope it's not the last we see of Casca. I hope she comes back and reclaims her character. So her sanity's gone. She is kind of like locked away now so that she doesn't, you know, come across any of monsters that try to kill her now that she's branded and she goes outside. Guts is now on a mission, which I love so much. I can't wait to read more so I can finally find out what happens next. And I love the way that he gets his sword. I love the little family that are now protecting Casca and Rickert, and it's just great. Like, it's a good ending. I just love all the little things that we learned in the arc that informs what happened in the Black Swordsman arc and all of that. It's just like, it's fantastic. It's so fantastic. And I'm sure there's probably like way more to say about the arc too. I want to go on a bit of a ramble and just give my thoughts and feelings and emotions just like in a sort of chatty format so that I can work through them. Because this is the first time I've actually vocalized my feelings on the rest of the Golden Age arc, and it feels a little bit cathartic. So I feel like I experienced a lot of trauma myself reading it. Ending the Golden Age arc with like a little bit of hope, a little bit of the idea that Guts will be continuing on the legacy of the Band of the Hawk. It's beautiful. It's weird to say Golden Age arc is beautiful, considering how awful a lot of it is in terms of the subject matter, but it was a beautiful arc. I need to move on. I need to move on and read the rest of the story for the first time. Yay!